Before I finish getting the final details done on frame 6 and the side supports for the seat, I thought I'd go ahead and bend frame 5. This gets bent almost identical to frame 3 in that these are going to overlap each other. We've got a 21502 and a 21501. The 21502 is the one that overlaps the top of this one here on the ends, and we'll rivet the ends together. The 21502 here needs to have a 13 millimeter lip, whereas all the other parts only get a 12 millimeter lip. Again, that's for the overlap. So I'm just going to go ahead and just start bending these edges according to the manual. We do need to bend some of these at a little bit short of full 90 degrees just to make sure that it fits the contour of the fuselage. So let me go bend these, see if we can get these put together or start assembling these, and I'll show you what it looks like after I get them bent. I just cut out the 40 thousandths plates that are supposed to mount onto either side of this frame 5 vertical supports. So what these do is these basically overlap the bottom here like this, and we do have to bend the bottom of this over because this actually creates the base. There isn't a piece that goes across because obviously the seat pan is in the way. So what I'm going to do is just go over and see if I can just bend this 90 degrees at the bottom on both of these. What I want to do is actually get these attached, and of course I've got the holes already in there, the bigger hole and the pinhole marked, and so I want to get these attached to these side pieces and then get each one of these sides pinned to the side of where they need to go on the fuselage before I actually pin them together on this overlap here. And part of the reason that I want to do that is the base of, it's actually upside down, but anyway, the base of this attached to this is going to determine the height of each side, and what I want to do is get them in place on the bottom of the fuselage and the side of the fuselage before I drill the part that overlaps so that I don't get any misalignment and get any pulling down here. Because these plates either aren't bent perfect or something, you know, there could be anything off that would make it so that if I drilled these first and then attach these on there, all of a sudden I don't have a flat surface to mount these to. So that's what I want to do first: get these bent, get these attached to here, and then go ahead and drill this flange into the side of the fuselage. Then I'll drill the center once the overlap is determined exactly where it needs to be. So I've been continuing to work here on frame 5. I did run into a few issues that I do want to point out. So on each one of the side panels of frame 5, we do have this 40 thousandths piece that we have to bend the bottom leg onto that needs to be 90 degrees from the side to the bottom. I had some issues bending that angle and keeping this part still at 90 degrees. It's such a short bend that, I'll show you on this one I'm still working on. It's such a short bend that it's easy to get it off, either in the bending brake or, you know, in my case, I'm bending it with my vise. And so I constantly made sure that I double checked with a square along the side of this part with it unattached to this, and made sure that when I put a square across there that this bottom flange here was exactly 90 degrees from the side of this frame piece. The other thing I did too is once I clecoed it into place, I went back and put a square along this edge here and across the bottom to make sure that this is staying exactly 90 degrees. In my case, all of mine were off a slight amount. Now what I was able to do is put this back into the vise and clamp it again on the one side, and whichever side was either short or long, I could leave it up off of the bending position that I had and just tap it with a hammer, and I could maneuver the center of the basically of the bend around there to either make the flange a little bit longer on one end or shorter on the other, depending on what I was trying to do, to make sure that I could keep this exactly 90 degrees. It's very difficult to just assume that the side or the bottom is 90 degrees and just push this up against there and hope that, you know, it was flat. And the other thing I also had to do is make sure that I took this angle. In fact, let me take this off of here real quick. See if I can get this off of here with one hand. Come on. Alright, hold on a second. Okay, so I did continually take this part here, put it on the bottom of the fuselage, and make sure that if I put pressure on this flange here, that this stayed parallel with where it needed to be. So for example, this piece actually goes here. So for example, this piece goes here. So what I would do is put this down here, push onto the angle, and make sure that this part here that comes up is exactly parallel with where I need to be vertically, because if these are off at all, in other words, if I have any pressure because this is bent this way or bent this way, I can pull it back into position, but what it's going to do is transfer all of that tension on these rivets here down to the bottom skin, and it's going to put a ripple in there. That's what I'm trying to avoid, is either ripple side to side or having it pull the skin up like this. So we want to make sure that the more time that we spend trying to fit these precisely into place with the exact angles so that we're not adding any tension onto either the side skin or the bottom skin, that's what gives you the more uniform look on the outside. So the other thing I'm also doing is, you can see I've attached this flange to the skin, I've attached this flange to the skin, but I haven't attached these two together down the center. Of course, they're two pieces. This is half of the one put in, and what I'm doing is just attaching the other half on the other side, but leaving the center here floating. And part of the reason that I'm doing that is this is not at the perfect angle. It's probably angled a little bit forward, and I need to angle it backwards, which means I need to bend this flange on this side a little bit more to pull this over, and I've probably got a little bit too much bend in this side on this flange, and I'll use that to pull it over. Because again, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not putting any tension in this to warp the outer skin, which I didn't really do a good job on frame 3 when I did this, and that's why I'm taking the extra time on frame 5 here to get these set up as well as possible. And had I done frame 3 differently, I would have done it the same way as this, where for this one here, what I did is I made the two parts of the frame, and then I pop riveted them together, and then tried to fit it all into place against the skin. It's better if you fit it against the skin first, then pop rivet it together once you've got all the angles and tension and everything squared up with these, and so that when you actually rivet these together down the center, that you're not applying any additional twist that you didn't plan on in advance. So again, I'm just spending a lot of time on these right now, just trying to get these to fit as well as I can to reduce the amount of deformation it creates on the skin out here. So anyway, I'm just going to keep working on these, make sure that these fit into place like this. Like I said, I do have to bend this one a little bit more, and then I'm going to mark and drill the holes on the outside here, get some temporary sheet metal fasteners in there, and then these should be pretty well ready to be put in. Because I think what I'm going to do is put these in almost right away before I finish the bottom. Well, I haven't decided yet. I don't know. It doesn't really matter because I can get in here with a rivet gun or a pop rivet gun, so I'm not sure it really matters. I need to think about this because I also want to make sure that this is laying on its side when I put these in, and I may glue these in. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. Let me figure that out once I get all of these set up, and then I'll decide what the best way to move forward is, because I'm thinking there are stiffeners that need to go in here. There's still stiffeners I have to put up here, and stiffeners that need to go back here, and I want to do all of that laying on its side and glue all of that in, in which case I might drill and cleco this to the bottom, or to the the side panel on the outside, the side form, and let that dry overnight, and then come back and do the stiffeners in between here. I could also glue in the side of frame 6 too at the same time. Again, just trying to figure out the best way to keep the skins looking decent. I really didn't do a very good job on the outside of the skin here and outside of the skin here, so I'm trying to make up for that a little bit when I do at least these last two, or at least not make things any worse. Okay, so let me get these finished first. We'll come back and I'll figure out exactly what order of things I'm going to do next. So I've completed the preliminary fit and drilling of frame 5 here, This was a long process. This took me about 6 hours, I think, to get to this point. Just trying to make sure that everything was bent and fit together right, that these were tight against the skin, that these were 90 degrees, because I don't have a reference here across here of what's straight or not. So trying to keep these from being twisted, I actually used a straight edge against frame 4, and then used a perfectly, square piece of scrap blocking that I had to slide along here and try and mark and tell exactly where square was for frame 5, because these are supposed to be directly across from each other and not angled to the curvature of the fuselage, although the curvature of the front of this here is supposed to be angled. That's why one side is slightly longer than the other, and you're supposed to bend them at angles so that it conforms to the fuselage this way, but points straight or perpendicular to the center line of the airplane. So but these look pretty good right now. I mean, the critical thing is to make sure you have nice tight fit along here, and that you don't have a lot of tension on the skin on the outside. The overlap is good here. I've got these now drilled through in the 3 spots that need to be drilled for rivets that go through the bottom of the fuselage, and I have those actually pinned in with temporary sheet metal fasteners, or clecos, from the bottom. So yeah, I'm actually quite happy with how it turned out. It just ended up being a lot more work than I had thought it was going to be. I thought this part was going to go pretty quick. So it's the end of the day now. I'm not exactly sure the order in which I'm going to do this yet. Let me think about this tonight, and I'll figure out exactly what I'm doing, and we'll go over it tomorrow. In order to finish some of the angles that need to be installed on the side supports for the seat box, we do have to finish the brackets that mount on top of frame 4 that support the seat pan. This actually mounts on top of frame 4. These 2 rivets mount across the top. This gets bent up, and then there's a lip here that gets bent that supports the seat pan that angles down towards the bottom of the fuselage. And this angle here with this on top of frame 4 is going to determine down in the side of the seat pan box exactly where one of the support angles goes. So I wanted to make sure I got these bent and fit into place so I could determine that exact angle and make sure that it was correct before I drilled the holes for those. So these are a little bit complicated to bend. These are 40,000ths. And you can see I've drilled the holes here for the nut plate that is going to hold the seat pan. I've got 2 holes in the middle for the form that we're going to bolt through it, and then this lip across the bottom, I've got the 2 rivet holes marked and drilled on the ends here. So we have 3 bends we have to do on this. We have to bend one of these legs one direction. We've got to bend the other leg here the other direction, and then we actually have to bend this little 1/4 inch or 3/16 curve that goes around here. We're going to bend that over, and we're going to use these MDF blocks. So what I'm going to do is basically bolt this between these 2 MDF blocks like this, and we'll go ahead and bend one side one direction, the other side the other direction, and then we'll pound this over flat. Now what I'm going to do is put some pretty significant radiuses on these blocks so that when I bolt this together and we bend it over, we're not going to hopefully crack this. We'll see. Obviously bending this curve is a little bit more difficult, but I think what I'm going to do is I'll see if I can use a rubber mallet for some of it, but what I might actually do is end up using like a larger diameter, maybe 3/4 inch rod, and just tap it down with a metal rod to get in there, because obviously you can't get in there with a flat hammer. I could probably use the rounded edge of my planishing hammer to maybe round that, but we'll see. Let me get this bolted together. I'll try and bend one. We'll see how it comes out, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. All right, I thought I'd just show you this before I pulled it out of the block here. It actually worked pretty well. Using any kind of hammer here, though, tended to nick the edge a little bit. It's nothing that won't polish out, but I was able to find a piece of steel pipe that was probably 1 inch in diameter that I just used to pound it down, and that actually worked pretty well. So I've got this side bent and this side bent, and I do have obviously some spring back that I'll have to take care of once I pop it out of here, but I think that'll be pretty easy to take care of with just even a pair of pliers and by hand, just to tweak it a little bit on the ends. But otherwise that looks pretty good. So I'm going to pull this out of here, see if I can straighten it up, and just double check the fit on top of frame 4. So this is what the part looks like after I bent it. It looks great. However, it doesn't fit. a couple things happened here. Well, first of all, I forgot that, of course, the width of the frame 4, which is the spar box, is variable. And of course, mine is wider, as most are, by a couple millimeters, partly even because of the angles that we're using that fit inside that make up the spar box, but also because you don't end up with that perfect 47.5 millimeter width of the spars. So the problem is this ended up a little bit short. In other words, when you place this across frame 4, the holes don't line up. So I got to make this longer. But in addition to that, this bracket ended up with the flanges being just slightly too wide. And that wouldn't normally be a big deal, except that takes material away from the height. And so if you actually look at this, you can see the slope going down here is supposed to meet up with the tip of this. But it falls short by 2 or 3 millimeters if you actually put a ruler across here. It hits short. And of course what happens with that is that this is supposed to meet with the back edge of frame 4. And then of course if you are going to lay sheet metal down here, it's going to lay down and hit frame 4. And so the only way to prevent it from hitting is to move this off the back of frame 4, which makes the whole thing even shorter. So even though I thought I bent this perfectly and it fit in the forms based on the proper shape, I don't know if these radiuses just ended up a little bit bigger, even though I really didn't put a huge radius on these blocks. I mean, I really just used a sander and just rounded them off. So I'm gonna have to go back to the drawing board here and try and do something a little bit different. I think what I'm gonna do is make this slightly bigger and make it so that this flange down here lengthwise is adjustable. And I think what I won't do is I won't drill the holes in it. That will allow for different widths of frame 4 and allow people to just line this up with the back wherever this slope comes down and hits frame 4, and then we can either cut the end off and drill the hole here, cut the end off and drill the hole here where it needs to be. I think that's going to be the only solution for this, because I really I made these forms exactly the size they should have been in the plans that should have made this bend properly. Now the only thing I could do is make the form a little bit bigger. That would reduce the size of these flanges a little bit, but the reality is these rivet holes are really in the center of that flange. And even though the flanges are about 13 millimeters wide all the way across to the outside, including the radius, they really look like they should. So let me think about this. I got to figure out this, and obviously I got to make new parts again. I wish I hadn't cut out the second one and tested one first, but I was pretty confident that this was going to work. So let me go back to the drawing boards. I'll be back in a few minutes or a few hours after I figure out what I'm doing here. We're ready here for round 2. I went ahead and cut 2 parts this time. This was the old part, and you can see what I've done here is I've left the holes out of the bottom and I made it longer on the front side. And then what I decided to do is I didn't mess with any of the other dimensions on this. What I did is I took these blocks here and I added 1 millimeter to each side, which will increase the length or the angle down here. And what it'll do is it'll reduce the sides up here so that when I bend them, so that they should be 12 millimeters wide like they should be in the plans, instead of the 13 millimeters wide that I ended up with in my final form. I did go back to the drawings. I didn't do anything wrong with these. It didn't look like when I made them. Of course, when I did the dimensions for these, I reduced them by 1 millimeter in width because of the bended material was supposed to be on the surface of this. So I'd compensated for that properly. But what I did is I basically added that millimeter back in. We'll go ahead and round the edges on these and see how they turn out. So let me go ahead and try and bend one of these, and I'll see what they look like when they're done. Hopefully this fits a little bit better, but I've got a little bit extra width here now so that it should be able to be adjustable slightly across the top of frame 4. So let me bend one of these and I'll be back in a minute. Alright, I'm just getting ready to pop the second try out of the blocks here. It does look like I've got a little bit better clearance now, at least back here. So we'll just pop it out of here and do some final tweaking on these bends to get rid of the spring back here on these bends, and we'll test it out and see how it fits. Now that I have this one bent, it actually gets installed right here where I have these two 3/32 rivets. I had stuck those in there just when I glued the cap on, but had planned on drilling these out. So now I've got plenty of extra length here now to adjust this a tiny bit. And also now when I put a straight edge across the backside here, it clears the end of this, which it should. In fact, I've got about 1 millimeter of clearance that actually gives me a little bit extra space. So it looks like this is the way to go. So I have both of the seat supports that mount on top of frame 4 temporarily held into place. I did run a straight edge across this surface on down just to see where the end of it would hit, to try and get an idea of where that angle would end up on the sides of the seat box support over here. And then I measured back from frame 4 to that mark, and it was right around 150 millimeters, and it looks like I should be at about 145-ish or so. So it's really close, and of course you just modify a slight bit here, you can get 5 more millimeters or take away 5 more millimeters on the end. So these look like they're close enough. I'm not too worried about them. I could even modify this bend just a little bit, you know, just depending on how I pound the edge down or straighten them out a little bit more. It can totally affect the length of it. So the good news is they are as accurate as they need to be as far as the positioning. So what I'm going to do now is work on these 2 side supports for the seat box, and there's 2 angles that are supposed to go in here. I've got a set of rivet holes here on the let's see, this is the right side, and there's another set of rivet holes over here on the left side. That's where the rear support for the seat pan goes. There's an angle that's supposed to get riveted to there and riveted here. And what I was concerned about was the front seat support that goes here. I didn't pre-drill those holes because, again, I was concerned about, you know, the angle of that being exact according to the plans or not. The good news is the end of it here ends up about right where it should be, so it's just a matter of just putting that angle in and then maybe running a straight edge up to those supports just to see that they're, you know, hitting in the right spot and that it's not too low or too high. But I'm going to go ahead and make the 2 angles here and see if I can get those held into place with Clicos, and then I'll go ahead and make this one, and I'll probably just drill the hole at the bottom so that it can move, and then I'll put these back in there temporarily and just run a straight edge across between there and the edge of frame 4 and just make sure that that's in the right position before I final drill it. So let me go ahead and make those angles, and those are the only things that we need to really finish on this before we actually rivet these together, clean these up, align these, rivet these together, and then these will be ready to be installed in the airplane. And what I've decided to do is to go ahead and kind of follow the manual here, in that I'm going to go ahead and finish everything on the bottom first. So I'm going to go ahead and finish these side supports for this seat area. I'm going to go ahead and finish the bottom of frame 6, and we're going to go ahead and get all of this riveted into place. I'm not going to rivet the sides here. I'm not going to rivet frame 5 here. So frame 5 and 6 sides. What I'm going to do is wait till we can put this on its side. Then we'll go ahead and glue in frame 5, glue in frame 6, and then we'll go ahead and do all the stiffeners in here while it's on its side. And then once we've done both sides, we will tip it back up. We'll go ahead and final drill all of the holes on these frames and go ahead and final rivet them together, including the corners down here. So I think that's how I'm going to do it. I think that's going to give us the best outcome as far as the making sure that we keep the correct shape. And then, of course, what we're going to start working on after that probably is the cockpit border that goes from frame 7 here all the way up to basically frame 2. There's a piece that's supposed to cover this angle on the side and overlap over the top of each one of our frames. That's really the last structural piece that we need to do on the forward fuselage before we just start fitting things out. So let me go ahead and finish these angles for the seat pan. We'll go ahead and get these seat pan sides ready to be installed, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm ready to do that. I finished making the angles here for the left side. The angle back here that supports the seat, I just did the standard angle according to the plans and just installed it, and it fits just fine. The one up here, what I ended up doing is making the angle exactly like what the plans had specified, and then, I did try and do some preliminary fit of this prior to drilling the holes, and all I did was take this and install it in the fuselage here where it goes, about like so. And then what I did is I took one of these off, took the temporary sheet metal fasteners off. I just moved it down here and held it into place, and then just put a straight edge across the angle down here across the edge of frame 4 and up this support here at the front, just to verify that the the angle or slope of this was correct according to how everything else was going to be fitting here with the seat pan, and it ended up working out exactly like the plans had specified. I've got the exact gap down between the fitting at the bottom and the seat belt support here, and then what I did on the top here to just get my starting location is there is a measurement in the plans that indicates, I think that's supposed to be 78 millimeters back, so I just put a piece of tape here with a line and lined up the top of this angle here with the top edge, and that's kind of where I did my starting point from, and then just adjusted it back and forth until the angle was right coming up here to frame 4. But it worked out perfectly. It's exactly where it should be. And so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and finish the other side, the right side of the seat box here. And I do have to put some nut plates in here, so I have some holes that I have to drill on the faces of these in order to attach the actual seat pan. So let me just keep working on these until I get these all done, and then we'll be able to start finishing up these side supports and start the riveting process. Okay, I have the side supports for the seat looks like mostly done now. I did get the nut plates drilled for their position on both the front and the rear seat pan supports. So these are at a point where I'm ready to pretty much take these apart, clean up these parts, allodyne them, and start riveting. Now the riveting here, what we're supposed to do is put 3 30-second rivets across the top here in every other hole, because the holes in between each rivet are supposed to be for the adjustment of the seat back. Since I did the mod here for the seat belt mounting plate, this is actually required in the modification to use solid rivets to rivet this into place. So when I look at this entire assembly as far as building this, assembling this prior to putting it in the airplane, the only rivets that aren't required to be solid rivets are the 3 bottom holes on this back support for the aft part of the seat pan, and the 4 rivets across the front support for the seat pan. I'm going to go ahead and just use solid rivets for everything on these side parts, especially these parts that are for the seat support. I kind of feel like all the pressure that's going to be on those could be variable and might loosen up the pop rivets. So I think it's better in this case to just use solid rivets for everything, at least on the side supports. When we install these in the airplane, they can be pop riveted to the bottom. Obviously, we're not going to get anything but pop rivets into these ends here, but it's also going to be bolted through that phenolic block that we're using and installing at the ends of these. So the only thing I haven't made yet that I kind of missed here is there's supposed to be an angle that mounts on the ends on the inside of each one of these parts. And the purpose of it is just to provide a secondary lip like this that's on the inside that will connect to frame 6, and that gets riveted down the back here, gets riveted across here, and it's an angle that sticks up, and then of course there's going to be 6 rivets then on the end of this, but there's supposed to be 3 rivets that are supposed to be solid rivets on the ends here too. I'm going to go ahead and make those real quick and fit those into place here, because I do want to allodyne those and rivet those onto this prior to installing these and attaching frame 6. So that's the only last thing that appears that I have to finish before these are completely ready to be finished and installed. So let me get those made and put into position. I'll show you what they look like when they're done, just so you can see what's going on here exactly. So let me make those. I'll be right back. All right, I went ahead and bent these angles that got attached to the other side of the rear part of these seat box supports. So yeah, it's just an angle that just gets bent, and we drill holes into the end here that are going to get to solid rivets, and then we can go ahead and pop rivet the ends of both of these onto frame 6. So there's one of these on each side. So now that those are done, I'm going to go ahead and fit frame 6 back in here, reposition it, and go ahead and get all these 6 holes on each side drilled out, so that I'm ready then to be able to go ahead and finish these and install these into the fuselage. So let me get those holes drilled, and then we'll start cleaning up these parts and allodyne them and start fitting them into the fuselage. So I hadn't previously drilled all of the holes here for frame 6 into the bottom of the fuselage, so I went ahead and use the same techniques I've done in the past, where I went ahead and put this in here, and with some tape I went ahead and marked the ends of where the side supports for the seat box ended up, where this was attached on each side. And then I pulled the frame out, I put some blue tape across between those marks, and then marked the line all the way across, just so I could get a perfectly straight line across the bottom of the fuselage for frame 6. I just wanted to make sure that with it being attached on the sides and hitting here, that it wasn't bowing out, and that we had it positioned in a nice straight fashion. And then I went ahead and drilled out the 3/32 rivet holes that go across the bottom here. These get increased to an 1/8 inch size when we actually go to rivet. So now all of this really in this aft section for the frames, the seat box, frame 5, frame 6 is really all ready to now be final, finished and installed. So what I'm going to do is do this in 2 steps. The first step is going to be doing the parts that are on the bottom of the fuselage. We're going to do that with the fuselage on its frame here. And so what I'm going to do is the sides of the seat box here, I'm going to take these apart. I am going to final drill some of the holes. There are some 1/8 inch holes that need to go in here. I'll go ahead and widen those out. That'll be easy to do. We'll go ahead and get all these parts cleaned up, alodined, and then we do need to put solid rivets basically in most of this assembly. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is just use solid rivets in all of the sub-assembly of these side parts. There's a few pop rivets we could put in here for these seat supports. I'm just going to put in solid rivets. I'm going to be solid riveting the rest of it anyway. And then also these holes that are in between each one of the rivets here along the side here that are for the adjustment of the backrest of the seat. I'm going to go ahead and drill those out probably on the drill press before I install this. It'll just be easier to do that now rather than coming back later and trying to drill those out. So we'll get those all cleaned up and ready to install, alodined, and we'll come back and we'll go ahead and rivet these into place through the bottom of the fuselage with pop rivets, and then in the end of frame 4 here with the pop rivets. Once those are installed, what we'll do is we'll just install the bottom part of frame 6. We'll get that riveted to the ends here with the pop rivets. We'll get that riveted across the bottom with the pop rivets. And then once that part is done, we're going to go to finishing the sides, which is going to include probably gluing this into place, frame 5, gluing frame 6 into place, and then going ahead and cutting all of the side stiffeners that need to be installed on the side, and even the ones that we haven't done yet that are in front of frame 4 here. And we're going to do one side at a time, just setting the fuselage on its side form, doing one whole side at a time, getting everything glued into place. Then we'll pop rivet it once the glue is dried, and then we'll flip it over and we'll do the other side. So we basically got three major steps that we're going to do here to finish this off: the bottom, and then do each side individually. So let me go ahead and take this apart. Let me go ahead and get these cleaned up and get these ready to actually be installed into the fuselage, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like right before I'm ready to rivet it into place. So these are all the parts that I now have alodined for one of the sides of the seat box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and use my rivet squeezer to just rivet this together. Most of it's 3/32, although there are some 1/8 inch ones that go for the the seat belt strap here. So I'll try and do this all with a rivet squeezer, but either way, I'm going to go ahead and get this riveted, and then as soon as I'm done with this one, I think I'm going to install this one, and then I'll go back and just alodine and do the exact same thing to the other side. I just finished riveting the one side of the seat pan support. I was able to get all of these in here with the rivet squeezer, with the exception of the ones that were part of this angle here on the front and back side of this. The rivet squeezer won't fit in between here, so I did have to just use, again, my tool in my table, and then use a flat rivet set to get down next to the angle here and buck these from the other side. As far as which direction these rivets need to go, of course the head is always supposed to go on the thinner side of the material if possible, and of course in between this support here and this support is where the seat pan is actually going to sit, so we want to keep probably the ends of the rivets off of the side where the seat cushion and fabric might be, so having the buck side on the other side is better anyway. But for here it doesn't matter, because again I've got actually the thinner side on this side, and the thicker side here on the angle side, so it's actually better to put these in from the other direction for the two angles. And again, because there's nothing behind this angle, in front of this angle, as far as, you know, fabric or seat related things that might catch on those, it's not going to matter at all. So I did put the solid rivets back here, so this is completely ready to go ahead and install now. So I'm going to go ahead and install this one, I think, and then I'll come back and I'll do the exact same thing to the other side. All right, I just finished riveting this side through the bottom onto the fuselage, so it's now attached. I was able to get the two lower rivets in here installed, and of course, as I mentioned before, I did leave this rivet out on frame 4. I'm glad I did, so I could get my riveting tool in here. I'm now going to flip this over and just install this rivet that I left out from previously. So now what I'm going to do is just repeat this process on the other side and get the other side installed. And then what I'm going to do is start prepping the bottom of frame 6. And what I'm actually going to do is final drill and rivet this to the bottom. Then I will come back and drill out these holes in the back here for the attachment to the side supports for the seat box, and then I'll pop rivet those after that. So let me get the other side done here and installed, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. So I now have both sides of the seat box riveted to the bottom of the fuselage. So what I've done now is I've removed frame 6, and I'm just going to prep the bottom part of frame 6 and get it back installed, and we'll go ahead and pop rivet that to the bottom and to the back sides of these cross supports. Once that is in place, then what we'll do is we'll start working on the sides here to complete frame 5 and the sides of frame 6 and all of the stiffeners that need to go between frame 3 and frame 7. So let me go ahead and finish up frame 6 here, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like when it's riveted in place. I finished pop riveting in both side supports for the seat area. I did final drill and pop rivet in the bottom part of frame 6, and then I also attached these side frames between frame 4 and frame 6 to frame 6 here in the back. Now, I had a little bit of difficulty getting these pop rivets in. I was able to get the pop rivets on the inside of here because my pop rivet gun would fit here, but for these rivets on the other side here, I got the lower two in from the other side here, and then the upper one you can't get in from the other side because of this lip here on frame 6. There's no way to get a pop rivet gun in there at all. You can barely get a drill bit in there. But I was able to get this rivet here in the top. I did have to create a tool to do that. So I think the plans actually show you creating like a little wedge like this that I was able to put in here to allow me to get my pop rivet gun here in at an angle and still pull the rivet straight. By using this little wedge here, you can angle your pop rivet gun. Whoops. It allows you to angle your pop rivet gun, but then it still pushes flat against the rivet head, so you don't end up with a crooked rivet head that you pop rivet into place. So this looks good. This came out nice. So now we're going to start working on the sides.